Integration in logical learning.
Act and scene wire summary. Merchant of Venice. About the play. Written by William Shakespeare. Composed in between 1596 and 1599. Date premiered, spring of 1605. About the playwright, William Shakespeare. Born the 26th of April, 1564, baptized. Died the 23rd of April, 1616. Famous for plays, tragedy, comedy, and poetry. Occupation writing and acting. A list of Shakespearean creations. Tragedy. Richard III, Henry VI, Richard II, Henry IV, Henry V, Titus Andronicus, Romeo and Juliet, Julius Caesar, Hamlet, Troilus and Cressida, Othello, King Lear, Macbeth, Timon of Athens, Antony and Cleopatra, Coriolanus. A list of Shakespearean creations. Continued. Comedy. All's Well That Ends Well, Much Ado About Nothing, As You Like It, The Comedy of Errors, Love's Labour's Lost, Measure for Measure, The Merchant of Venice, The Merry Wives of Windsor, A Midsummer Night's Dream Pericles, Prince of Tyre, The Taming of the Shrew, The Tempest, Twelfth Night, The Two Gentlemen of Verona, The Two Noble Kinsmen, The Winter's Tale, Cymbeline. A list of Shakespearean creations. Continued. Poetry. Venus and Adonis, The Rape of Lucrece, A Lover's Complaint, The Phoenix and the Turtle, The Passionate Pilgrim, published under his name without his permission. Sonnets. Shakespeare's time. English literary history can be divided into three broad divisions. Old English period, c. 5th century AD 1066 AD. Norman conquest and Middle English period, 1066 AD 15th century AD. New English period, 1500 onwards. This division is debatable because most of the European and some of the American scholars do not attest this. They consider the supposed Old English period to be pre-English and advocates the beginning of English literary history from 1066 AD onwards. However, British and Commonwealth scholars more or less recognize the above division to be the timeline of English literary history. Shakespeare's time. Continued. Following M.H. Abrams and G.G. Harpham, we may divide in detail out English literary periods into AD 450 to 1066 Old English period, 1066 to 1500 Middle English period, 1500 to 1558 Renaissance, 1558 to 1603 Elizabethan Age, 1603 to 1625 Jacobean Age, 1625 to 1649 to Caroline Age, 1649 to 1660 Puritan Interregnum, 1660 to 1700 the Restoration Age, 1700 to 1745 the Augustan Age, 1745 to 1785 the Age of Sensibility or the Age of Johnson, 1785 to 1800 pre-Romantic period, 1800 to 1832 Romantic period, 1832 to 1901 the Victorian period, 1901 to 1914 the Edwardian period, 1914 to 1945 Modernism, 1945 onwards Postmodernism. Shakespeare's time. Continued. Elizabethan period, 1558 to 1603. Named after Queen Elizabeth I of England. Regime of comparative stability and less bloodshed after the despotic reign of Elizabeth's father King Henry VIII, stepbrother King Edward and stepsister Queen Mary I. An unmarried queen with a lot of rumors about her personal life. Glorious reign, and the queen was revered by all. Sir Edmund Spenser, her poet laureate, symbolizes her to be Gloriana, the queen of the fairyland, in his poem The Fairy Queen. 1564, Shakespeare was born at Stratford-on-Avon. 1580s and 1590s Shakespeare's acting career followed by the writing career set off. Execution of Mary the Queen of Scots. 1603 the unmarried queen dies, nominating her nephew James of Scotland to be the next king of conjoined Scotland and England. Queen Elizabeth I of England, 1533 to 1603. Reign 1558 to 1603. Shakespeare's time continued. Jacobean age 1603 to 1625. 1603 James VI of Scotland ascended the conjoined English and Scottish throne after Elizabeth I of England died as James I of England and Scotland. Shakespeare was still continuing his career but now under a new and foreign king. Great Plague intrigued London and Theatre Hall remained shut for a few years. After the plague was over, King James dissolved the former aristocratic drama company Lord Chamberlain's Men to reinstall it as a direct royal troupe, the King's Men. Shakespeare produced most of his finest plays under King James, contrary to the popular belief that he composed most of his masterpieces in the Elizabethan era. 1616 Shakespeare died at Stratford-on-Avon. King James I of England, Ireland and Scotland 1566-1685 reign as King of Scotland. 1567 to 1603 reign as King of England, Ireland and Scotland. 1603 to 1625. Let's come back to the main topic. The Merchant of Venice, written by William Shakespeare, composed in between 1596 and 1599 Elizabethan age. Date premiered spring of 1605 Jacobean age. Setting Venice. Genre comedy. 5-act play. Dramatis personae. Antonio, a prominent merchant of Venice. Bassanio, Antonio's close friend, suitor to Portia, later the husband of Portia. Gratiano, friend of Antonio and Bassanio, in love with Nerissa, later the husband of Nerissa. Lorenzo, friend of Antonio and Bassanio, in love with Jessica, later the husband of Jessica. Portia, a rich heiress, later the wife of Bassanio. Nerissa, Portia's waiting maid, in love with Gratiano, later the wife of Gratiano, disguises herself as Portia's clerk. Balthazar, Portia's servant. Stefano, Portia's servant. Shylock, a miserly Jew moneylender, father of Jessica. Jessica, daughter of Shylock, later the wife of Lorenzo. Tubal, a Jew friend of Shylock. Launcelot Gobbo, servant of Shylock, later a servant of Bassanio, son of Old Gobbo. Old Gobbo, blind father of Launcelot. Leonardo, slave to Bassanio. Duke of Venice, authority who presides over the case of Shylock's bond. Prince of Morocco, suitor to Portia. Prince of Aragon, suitor to Portia. Salarino and Salenio, also known as Salenio, friends of Antonio and Bassanio. Salerio, a messenger from Venice, friend of Antonio, Bassanio and others. Magnificos of Venice, officers of the Court of Justice. Gaolers, servants to Portia, and other attendants, and Dr. Valerio, cousin of Portia. Plot overview. In Venice, Bassanio approaches his friend, moneylender Antonio, for a loan which he will use to secure a date for Portia, a rich heiress in the city of Belmont. Due to certain circumstances, Antonio finds that he cannot satisfy the need of his friend Bassanio and suggests Bassanio to take the loan from Shylock, another moneylender in Venice and a Jew by religious faith. Antonio is a generous businessman and he even grants loan interest-free. His generosity has invited downfall in the trade of Shylock and other Jews of the town whose commerce has been stripped. Though Shylock possesses anger against Antonio, when Antonio approaches him on behalf of Bassanio, he readily agrees to grant an interest-free loan, naming Antonio the guarantor. Shylock places the condition that if Bassanio will fail, Antonio will have to resolve the debt by a payment of his own flesh. Bassanio repeatedly inhibits Antonio, but the latter consents to this horrific condition laid by Shylock. Plot overview continued. On the other hand, Portia is living at her paternal mansion in Belmont, longing for Bassanio's arrival. She has the company of a faithful one-loving lady-in-waiting, Nerissa. Portia's father has left 3 caskets and has stipulated that Portia will have to marry the person who will choose the correct casket by his will. Portia does not like any of her 2 current suitors and longs for Bassanio. Nerissa is also very fond of him and approves a potential relationship between Portia and Bassanio. In Venice, Launcelot Gobbo, Shylock's servant, leaves Shylock's household to serve Bassanio. Jessica, daughter of Shylock, maneuvers to elope with Antonio's friend Lorenzo. In the night of a festival, Jessica and Lorenzo succeed in their planned elopement. Bassanio and his friend Gratiano leave for Belmont to meet Portia in the next morning to the festival. Plot overview continued. Shylock is infuriated to know that his daughter has eloped, but becomes when he heard the rumor of Antonio's fleet being shipwrecked. He thinks he will soon be able to claim his debt. In Belmont, Portia's suitors, the Prince of Morocco and the Prince of Aragon, chooses the gold and the silver box respectively, but they are proven to be wrong. Bassanio and Gratiano arrive in Belmont. Bassanio confesses his love for Portia and takes the test. He chooses the correct box immediately, which was made of lead. In the meanwhile, Gratiano confesses his love for Nerissa. Thus, the pair of couples decide a double wedding. They are joined by Lorenzo and Jessica, who have eloped earlier. They come to know about Antonio's ill luck and that he is going to be forfeited by Shylock. Bassanio and Graciano leave for Venice immediately. Portia and Nerissa also decide to go there, camouflaging as men. In Venice, Antonio has already been put into trial by Shylock. The Duke of Venice presides over the trial. He calls for a young legal expert who is none but Portia in disguise of a young man and Nerissa disguised as the young clerk to the young expert. Plot overview continued. Portia asks Shylock to be merciful towards Antonio, but Shylock refuses. Bassanio promises interest twice more than the contract, but Shylock stubbornly keeps demanding for Antonio's flesh as his legal claim. Portia examines the bond and then declares flesh of Antonio to be Shylock's lawful claim. Shylock becomes happy and praises her wisdom. But Portia extends a verdict to the extent that Shylock must not make Antonio bleed while cutting the flesh because he is entitled legally to the flesh only, but not even to a drop of blood. Shylock fails to justify anything at this point. The Duke declares Shylock to be guilty. In accordance with the Venetian law, Shylock now has to hand over half of his property to Antonio and the other half to the state. However, the Duke does not take away the whole property of Shylock, but he verdicts Shylock to hand over half of his property to Antonio and to pay an enormous fine in lieu of handing over the other half of his property entirely to the state. Antonio also declares to forego his share as well, provided Shylock converts immediately to Christianity and names Lorenzo and Jessica to be the heir to his entire estate upon his death. Shylock agrees and takes his leave. The expert and his or her clerk depart. Bassanio and Graciano also depart for Belmont, unknowing that their wives in disguise saved the life of their friend. Portia and Nerissa reach Belmont and find Lorenzo and Jessica busy in their romantic entanglement. Bassanio and Graciano arrive there and Portia makes everything clear before them. They become immensely happy and grateful. Lorenzo and Jessica come to know about their fortune and become happy. The rumor regarding Antonio's fleet being shipwrecked is proven to be false. The group celebrates the cheerful moment. Thank you for today.